record this because, you know, I want maybe some of those students at home to also hear this. The early turn-in date, right, hasn't changed for 2.5 months. Okay, so 2.5 months ago, I gave this instruction. It was all written out. I gave you the questions. We've been through the question. I've been lecturing on this first question almost every day for like a 6-week period in order to make sure that everybody got the first one down really well and they could then take their skills and do the next and the next and the next. We even had a practice with the Lee and Romney thing where you did the data analysis first and then the opinion later. Remember, no opinions in this paper. Opinions have to come after I get back. So after April 1st, for those who have started the early turn-in, you will know these topics and you'll be able to discuss them from a viewpoint of knowledge. So it'll be informed opinion, not just, well, I need to say something because everybody wants to hear me talk kind of a thing. It's going to be, I know this topic well, and here's what I think about it. So a much more collegiate level debate, right? Because people are informed. So that's kind of the strategy. So we're going to get the facts in the research paper, which is what research is about. And then we'll do the opinion stuff later. Okay, so this takes time. So I've got to have all of these in by April 1st at midnight. I'll turn them around as fast as I can. That's why I love it if some people could turn some in early. If I could get 1 or 2 more in today, a couple more next Sunday, and just get the ball rolling here, that would be great. Because on May 1st at midnight, I will not take any more papers. So if you miss early turn-in, it's my job then to get them corrected, get them turned around, give you at least a week or so to make the fixes and to get it in by May 1st. May 1st at midnight, if you haven't submitted the paper, the best grade you can get, having completed all the study guides to perfection, will be a C- is the best you can hope for as a grade. And this is in a semester where I got to be honest with you, this is the easiest semester we've ever had in political science because of COVID, because of the situation we're in. Anybody can get an A that wants it. All you have to do is work for it. And the number one thing you got to work for is this date right here. And so for those of you who are listening now for the first time, because it's actually real in terms of your, you know, coming up imminently, what are we on? What's the day? The 24th, right? 1st of April? Oh, April Fool's Day. You would be a fool not to turn this in on that day, because this would help you guarantee that if you want an A, you can have an A. Miss that date, there's no guarantees. And trust me, you miss on one of these questions, there's an A-. Miss on 2, B+. Miss on 3, it's a B. Which is still a great college grade, by the way. I'm not going to say it's not a great college grade. It is. But you want an A. Okay? So it was amusing. It's always amusing, but this is every semester. So don't feel like I'm picking on you or whatever. It always makes me laugh. But after all this advanced work, giving you 15 days of no study guides, right? Some people still haven't finished the one study guide that should have been done before the holidays, right? 15 days to do nothing but write this paper. People are going to get another study guide tomorrow, and we're back to study guides. We're going to have about 4 more, and they're not going to have their paper done. Yet there's others who have their paper completely done and can do these study guides reasonably well and quickly, and then have time for their math and their science and their classes. But this is always the way it is. It just seems like the majority of students just wait till the end until there's all this extra pressure on them, right? Speaking of pressure, okay, we're gonna show you this one. I saved this, okay, until after you took the ACT test, because I didn't want to discourage any of you before the exam, but there's basically a movement afoot to dump these high stakes exams for college entrance. In fact, because of COVID this year, the state of California,
out of the admissions process.
Of course, California has the biggest college education system in the country, and the most extensive, and they have some of the greatest universities, you know, UCLA, Cal Berkeley, I mean, you go on and on. Stanford's private, right? UCLA's private. But beyond that, I mean, you've got UC Berkeley, you've got UC California, UC Santa Barbara, UC San Diego, some of the great universities in the country. Many of those two of those in the Pac-12, what University of Utah's in. And there's no more college exams this year. They don't care what your ACT is. Here we go. You ready? Play.
Standardized testing. Here's Antonia Hilton.
For these high school seniors,
show of hands, who here ended up taking a standardized test? Just one.
A key college admissions predictor, standardized tests, gone.
It was a lot of pressure.
All three applied test-free to University of California schools. The pandemic, administrators say, intensifying concerns around the fairness of tests. This year, the UCs saw record applications, with a surge among Black and Latino kids.
Is it going to level the playing field? Probably not. Do I think people might get a better shot? Yeah.
Our NBC News study found tests, quizzes, and assessments were the #1 stressor for students in fall 2020. David Joaquin says even without the pressure of the SAT, he fell behind. He lost a family member this year and had to care for 4 siblings.
This has been a pretty emotional, hard time for me, and I know that whatever score I would have gone in, I would not have been happy with it.
But testing might not be gone for good. The UC system considering coming up with its own exam.
Any way you can find more contextual information to understand students, I think that would be a great thing, particularly if the tests don't create sort of the separation between the have and have-nots.
But couldn't any test end up separating the haves and have-nots?
Absolutely. It's certainly something we're mindful of. And how does that inform how we move forward in an equitable manner?
To Corey Cleveland's parents never got the chance to go to college.
I think the removal of standardized testing is just pulling a leaf off of one of the trees. We need to attack the roots because you can't affect the system by simply attacking one part of it.
Now she hopes to be the last in her family to ever worry about a high-stakes test. Antonia Hilton, NBC News, Los Angeles.
All right, so there you go. So you guys who just took it's a big deal at UCAS, the ACT day. It always has been. But is it necessary? What do you think? Raise your hand if you were stressed before the ACT test in any way. Raise your hand. Okay. How many of you think the test should just go away? Any thoughts?
Go away or not? Like, if you speak loudly, you might be able to hear you.
Yeah, speak loudly. Have a little discussion here because it'll be interesting. See, because why bother with this test? Why not just let anybody who wants to go on to college go on to college? Now, look, you're going to have Stanford and you're going to have a Harvard and that, and they're going to have limited admission in some way or another, so GPA and other accomplishments. But many of the major universities have already gotten rid of the standardized test, the ACT and the SAT. Why? Because they're all biased. We had a lot of discussion this semester about bias. Mr. Barkstall's biased, he's this and that, and other people biased. Everybody's biased. Everybody has a bias. But here's one, it's called cultural bias. And let me tell you what cultural bias is. And I've written more test items than anybody in the state of Utah, I'm pretty sure, because I wrote for major software companies, certification exams, for 5 different companies now. And also too, I wrote 65 textbooks, right? And for those textbooks, they were more in the tech area. In those textbooks, I had to do for each book, a test item pool of at least 300 to 500 items per book, right? And I learned how to write tests by being tutored by one of the heads of the very company that writes the ACT and the SAT exams. So I know test items probably as good as anybody in the state of Utah. I don't think there's anybody that knows them better than I do. I can't think of anybody. But here's the deal. Depending on the culture, you can write a question that one culture will get right because you're using terms and terminology and that comes from their culture they understand. And if you write it from another cultural perspective, using words and vocabulary that they don't normally use, then there's going to be an advantage depending on the cultural. That's called cultural bias. And it's just a big thing in testing. How do you write a culturally neutral question that anybody from any background would have a chance to get right? Tests can be very biased culturally. There's no doubt about that. They've done tons and tons of studies. I mean, for 30 years. We know this about tests. Tests are not fair. if they have any sort of hint of cultural bias. Now, that's why you're probably going to do have a cleaner test in mathematics, for example, because you're dealing with the vocabulary of math than you will, for example, in a social science or even in an English class, where the vocabularies are different for different cultures. And if you use the vocabulary from one culture, the other cultures won't have that advantage. It's just simple science here. So I say we dump them all together. Why bother with it? Anybody who wants to go to college should be able to go to college. As long as somebody's willing to learn and willing to try, let them have the shot. Some high prestige universities, yes, you need some sort of maybe thing, but to go to the University of Utah or to UVU or whatever, I don't think UVU requires a test anymore, do we? Do you guys know?
They accept everybody, but you do have to take some placements, I think, for like math and English. So they have like the AccuPlacer test just to know where to put you in the class.
But you don't have to take the ACT to get into UVU, right?
I don't know if they have to accept everybody, but I don't know if they require it or not. Do you know?
No, but I love the earlier.
Yeah, probably for scholarship consideration at least.
Yeah, that's what mine is about.
Is that how it works? Is if you there's certain scholarships that still require it?
And if you don't have the ACT, what are you going to base your scholarship on, right?
Yeah.
Not very good.
Yeah, almost all of the in-state schools, they have a little chart and you put your ACT on one side and your GPA on the other side and you're automatically assigned whatever scholarship.
So essentially, to get into any Utah university now, it's like California, the ACT is irrelevant. But if there's certain scholarships, maybe you want to take that. And if you get a 32 or 34, it's going to help you compete for that scholarship. I kind of like that. I think that's kind of a good way to go. You know, the biggest stress in my classes over the years has been my tests. Deliberately made them challenging. 100 questions per test, 3 times a year. Why? To prepare people to take the ACT. And yet it was the biggest stressor in my class, and it was only, it was only 30% of the grade. So basically, it wasn't the big thing. The research paper was worth as much as all 3 tests combined, yet everybody's stressed over the test. So with COVID, I just made a deliberate decision. You guys got enough to worry about. So I just dropped the tests. Well, for 2 reasons. One, I didn't want you under any more stress than you're already under. But the other thing is that we don't have but 40% of the time to work with. And discussions like this, of course, take up a lot of time, which makes it even less. So really, we're dealing with maybe a third of what we normally were able to touch. And we couldn't take 3 days out to take tests on top of that. So there were 2 reasons, but one was to relieve the stress. And this is the first time, this year is the first time in my life where I've said anybody who wants an A can get an A. Because what the test did was guaranteed us a curve. And the college wants us to have some sort of curve. I just, for now, threw that out because I'm sitting there thinking, no, we're in a unique circumstance. So anybody that wants an A is going to be able to earn an A. And that should take some stress. Oh, by the way, we're not going to have any deadlines either to reduce the stress of an already stressful environment. Hopefully it worked. I've had a lot of people say, hey, you know what? Thanks for not putting any deadlines on this. Of course, the end, you got to have a completion date, right? At the end, it's got to be in because the semester's over and you have to have your grades submitted to the university and to the school at a certain date. So there's got to be an end date, right? I mean, that's just the way it is. But you know what I've noticed, and this is interesting, maybe you'll see this is interesting, but I find it fascinating. People have done a better job keeping up with no deadlines than they did when I had deadlines. Isn't that fascinating? That when I got rid of the deadlines, more people have kept up and done better with no deadlines than they did when we actually said, oh, this is due on Friday and there's going to be 10% off if you do this and 10% off. I had more students falling behind then than I do now. With the one exception, and that's that Lee Romney thing. And that's so out of character. You guys should have knocked that out in a day. But you know, again, maybe you had a math thing, maybe you had a math midterm or whatever. So I understand that. So to take the pressure off, we got rid of the deadlines, and more people have kept up with no deadlines than when we had deadlines. Why is that? Can you give me a reason for that? Because I don't understand. That one's still perplexing to me. My world history, they all keep up with no deadlines. It's fascinating. Any rationale there? You guys got a reason for that?
I like doing things on my own time when people tell me to do them. Yeah, no.
Yeah, so when people tell others, when you're told what you need to do or when you need to do it, instinctively, a lot of people don't want to do it then. So removing the deadline kind of gives it a bit less of a feel of, I'm telling you to do this, and you need to do it.
Mrs. Bogart, can you relay that one to me? Because I couldn't hear it.
Yeah, you just said some people, when you're told what to do and when to do it, you
Yeah.
kind of like rebel against that automatically. It's like a natural tendency.
Wow.
So without a deadline, you feel like it's more your choice, and
Wow.
it
Wow.
feels better to do it that way.
Okay, that's fascinating. That's quintessentially too a Western American attribute.
Yeah.
It's true though, right? Americans in the West tend to be very independent minded. You ask them, they'll do it. You tell them, they won't. That was an interesting answer there. I wished I could have been in person. Well, next week I will be. We'll be in person and we can have these kinds of discussions and whatever. But it does then eat into the curriculum time. But I think it was a worthwhile discussion to have. And I changed the order here from the last period. Look, there's all sorts of things going on, right? And again, here's the problem I get. When I explain any issue, when I bring anything up, people who are only half listening hear what they want to hear. They think, oh, he's for this and he's against that and he's this and that. And come on. All I'm doing is reporting the issue. And in this particular case, my purpose for this one, and it's a hot button issue. It's called gun rights, a big hot button issue. Anyway, point is that what I want you to take from this is that the filibuster may die in the Senate, right? And that there are laws moving through Congress to stem gun violence. And how are those laws going to pass, especially in the Senate, if with the filibuster rule in place? That's my objective. And yet at the end of this, somebody's going to say, oh, he's pro-gun or he's anti-gun or he's whatever. And we're so split in this country on guns. When I first started teaching, it was about 70% where guns were okay. Now that's down to about 40%. Most families don't have guns, have any history with it, yet other families have had guns in their family for generations, and they're comfortable with that. But the United States has an issue with guns. It does. We have more guns in this country than we have people. We're the only country where that is true. That means some people have a lot of guns and other people don't have any. And this is one of the big issues in American history. It's one of the great debates to have in class. Okay, now I have an opinion, but I'm not going to share that with you. You may think I have one opinion or the other, and you will be wrong. I guarantee you. So what we're going to do is we're going to play this though, because we had another mass shooting, 2 in 1 week. And this is something that through most of the pandemic, we haven't really had a problem with because we've had a different kind of lifestyle and situation in that. Now that the masks are coming off and everybody's feeling this surge of whatever, then we get gun violence again. So let's go ahead and look at one of those other issues that needs to be debated. There's Supreme Court's, by the way, listening to a new case on the Second Amendment right now. So this has to do with the courts. This has to do with Congress passing laws. This has to do with the filibuster in the Senate. That's my instructional objective, are those issues, right? You develop your own opinion on this. And I could really, honestly, truly care less what your opinion is, okay? But I do care that you understand how things work through Congress, how they work in the Supreme Court, and the filibuster rule, which may have found its day. It may be over. Filibuster may be over. The filibuster, in short, I don't think we've talked about it yet. The filibuster basically is a set of Senate rules that are traditional that say for any major legislation, you have to have 60 senators agree, not 50. So it's not majority rule. Basically, 41 senators can block any major law. The filibuster has been under attack now. The Republicans basically got rid of it for judge appointments. The Democrats got rid of it on this big bill where a majority should be enough to pass, right? So it's majority rule. There's nothing in the Constitution that says there should be a filibuster, but it's just a Senate tradition. I guess you have to call it tradition, where 41 senators can stop anything. For example, one of the big issues we'll be talking about is, should Washington, D.C. become a state? Should Puerto Rico become a state? The House is passing a law to allow D.C. to become a state. They have more people than Wyoming, more people than Vermont, and yet they have no voting members in Congress, no senators, no members of the House. And yet they have a bigger population than Vermont, they have a bigger population than Wyoming. I think they're bigger than Alaska in terms of population, not sure. Point is, Puerto Rico is much bigger. Should Puerto Rico be given statehood? These are big issues. The problem is Republicans are going to be against it. And if there's a filibuster in place, guess what? If the filibuster's in place, it won't pass because DC will be 2 Democratic senators for sure, and a member of the House that will be a Democrat. It's the most Democratic city in America. Puerto Rico is about 60-40 pro-Democrat. So that would be 4 senators that would be Democrats. So Republicans are going to fight this tooth and toenail to the end because it would give an advantage to the Democrats in the Senate and in the House to some degree. But at any rate, let's get to the gun issue and let's get to this filibuster issue. Here we go. Ready? Play.
Hold. Good evening. This is not the normal anyone wanted to return to. The America where people going about their day, going about their business, can have their lives snatched from them by a stranger with a gun. The mass murder at a Colorado grocery store yesterday rekindles a legacy of terror and loss none of us wants to revisit. Yet just a week after the mass shooting in Atlanta, here we are tonight trying to understand what drove a man to open fire on shoppers in Boulder, Colorado. 10 lives being mourned tonight, including the police officer who ran towards the shots and died trying to stop the killer. We'll tell you about his bravery and his personal story and what we know of the others whose fates collided in the aisles of that store. Aaron McLaughlin is there with late details.
Tonight, we're learning more about the deadly grocery store attack in Boulder, Colorado.
There's a shooter, active shooter, get away!
The alleged gunman now charged with 10 counts of murder, and the victims ages 20 to 65, 10 in total, including 62-year-old Lynn Murray, a wife and mother of 2, 25-year-old Ricky Olds, and 20-year-old Denny Stong, both employees at the store. 61-year-old Kevin Mahoney, whose heartbroken daughter says she's thankful he walked her down the aisle last summer, and police officer 51-year-old Eric Talley, the first to arrive on the scene.
I feel numb. And it's heartbreaking. It's tragic. This officer had 7 children.
Many were at the store for their COVID vaccine, others for a simple shopping trip. The shooting spree began Monday afternoon in the King Soopers parking lot. Grocery store worker Emily Giffen was there. She says she saw an elderly man shot multiple times.
This guy with this huge gun, huge like assault gun, came up behind him and shot him like 3 more times in the back while he was down.
Look, holy
The suspect then entered the store with an assault rifle to continue his deadly rampage. Nearly an hour after the shooting began, the suspect, shot in the leg, surrendered to the SWAT team after removing most of his clothes. The suspect's been identified as Ahmed Alalawi Alaisi, 21 years old. He's known to have a history of violent behavior, including pleading guilty to a 2017 assault charge. He did not answer questions to police at the scene, though he asked to speak to his mother. According to the affidavit, his sister-in-law says she saw the suspect playing with what she described as a machine gun about 2 days ago.
What this person did was awful, but like what's left behind is awful too. And like, how do we just go on like normal? I don't know how to go to work and like see the spot where my friends died and like be okay.
Some of the people shot were actually on their way to get their COVID shot. And it's in Colorado where all these mass shootings started. There was a school there called Columbine High School, and a couple of kids who were mad at the world, dressed up like Matrix characters, took all these guns into their school, shot up the school, something fierce. And since then, it's just been one copycat event after another, after another, after another. This is 1999. And look, people are saying, well, just enforce the laws in the books, but obviously the laws in the books aren't working. This guy right here was obviously mentally ill. I mean, I'm making an assumption there, alleged shooter, alleged to have some mental illness problems, but when he starts taking all of his clothes off, when he starts, you got some issues there. People with mental illness should not have guns. Those laws are already there, but they're not working. So new laws are going through the House right now. In fact, they've already passed 2 laws to try to tighten things up, right? And so this is a big debate, right? It's just a huge one that goes on in American history. But obviously the laws that we have on the books, let's enforce the laws that are there, isn't working. It hasn't worked for 20 years. So what do we do? I don't know what we do. I don't have an answer for this. Do you? Here we go.
Week, President Biden's new call to ban assault weapons and tighten gun laws in a divided Senate. Can this go anywhere? The new missile launched by North Korea, the first since President Biden took office. The new images from inside border facilities, migrant has 20 years. After a deadly pandemic year, the country is again facing an enemy within, gun violence and mass murder. Here's Tom Costello.
Yet again tonight, familiar heart.
Now, sorry, I messed up here. Here's President Obama now talking about this shit, but I want to get back because I also have to show you Biden. Biden is promised to try to change some laws to make, things work here. And I'm sorry.
Yet again tonight, familiar heartbreak and a gut-wrenching irony that the victims in Boulder managed to survive a global pandemic only to die in America's decades-long epidemic of gun violence. Only a week ago, it was Atlanta. Before that, there was Milwaukee and El Paso, Dayton, Virginia Beach, Thousand Oaks, Pittsburgh, Santa Fe, Parkland, Las Vegas, Orlando, Newtown, Aurora, Charleston, Virginia Tech. The list of places and names goes on and on. Since the Columbine massacre in 1999, there have been at least 114 mass shootings, 1,300 victims. Today, former President Obama wrote, "We should be able to live our lives without wondering if the next trip outside our home could be our last. We should, but in America, we can't." While hate and mental problems occur in every country, America is unique with more guns than there are people.
The effort has always been through American history to protect everyone's rights under the Constitution, but at the same time, we all have the right to public safety.
The country has suffered through so many mass murders, many Americans now feel a personal connection to one or even more. The same hometown, the same school, the same grocery store, the same bar or concert. Just as the country begins to emerge from the COVID darkness, the question many are asking tonight, is America's new normal just the old normal once again? Tom.
Well, there's kind of the history of it. And I remember there was a big change at our school, right, when the Parkland shootings in Florida happened. And we went from basically pro guns as a school in terms of majority to just the other way. And it became a real hot button debate issue in class. And it's probably one of the debates we should have, right? Right now, the only real Second Amendment thing that's been ruled on by the Supreme Court is the Heller case. And in the Heller case does allow people a weapon for personal security in their own home, but it's very limited. When you read the Second Amendment, it's really obscure. Is it for a National Guard type thing, for a militia, or does everybody have a right to a gun no matter what? Well, the Supreme Court's and the laws don't suggest that. It's that states can make laws against guns, so can the federal government. But there's got to be some sort of carve out, right, for people who use guns for sport or for, just personal offense. It's a delicate issue, but we haven't got a handle on it. And I don't know which direction this is going to go, but I do know that if it's going to get through the Senate, The filibuster can't exist as a rule. If the laws passed by the House already are going to pass the Senate, then they're going to have to dump the filibuster and then hope they can get even all the Democrats on board and cast a deciding vote with the vice president. Even then, it will be difficult. With, for example, Senator Joe Manchin comes from West Virginia. It's a big gun-owning state. Arizona, you got Kristen Sinema down there. It's going to be tough to pass the Senate, even with a 50% vote. But keep your eye on that one, and we'll, like I said, it's a great debate to have in class. It gets a little heated now, I got to be honest with you, because we have strong opinions on both sides. But one thing you always have to remember is right to life is first, okay? No matter what else, you have a right to public safety, personal safety in this country, at least we hope. And so it kind of starts with that, and then you work your argument down from that point. And so if you're going to do a nice argument on that, you have to say everybody's got a right to life. How do we maintain that with these guns? We have more guns than people. It's a tough one, but like I said, I'm bringing it up because of the filibuster rule and some things like that. So we'll go ahead and revisit that when I get back live with you next week. Well, now let's get back to the regularly scheduled lecture here. And we're going to go ahead and it turned out, because of this discussion and because of these issues, we took too long on this. So we're going to have one more lecture before I give you the study guide, which is probably a good thing. So this gives you 2 more days to work on your paper. But here's the thing, what we're talking about now, of course, we started with the Greeks defining all sorts of terms, which is really important, and using Athens and Sparta and the Persian Wars as kind of our catalyst to teach us certain things that are really, change agents in world history. So what we're talking about is diplomatic, economic, and military power, which are the 3 elements of power. Sometimes we call this diplomatic power soft power, right? We call the economic power, look, without a strong economy, you don't have a strong military, and you can't afford a diplomatic thing. So a strong economy is a very important thing. And you also have to have a degree of national unity. And up until recently, the United States, when it came to foreign policy, was pretty unified, but now we're not unified on that issue either. It's like this country is so divided, we can't even unite around foreign policy anymore, which we always were able to do. But we see where these big events, like the Battle of Salamis or the Peloponnesian Wars, basically then left a change in the balance of power. So power shifted from Persia to Athens, from Athens to Sparta, from Sparta to Thebes, and on it goes until Rome comes, and you know the history. But we use some examples, for example, Waterloo, right? Where the French were in control of Europe. They had everything going their way. They had the greatest general since Alexander the Great, Napoleon, and yet he goes too far when he attacks Russia, overextends his lines. As a result, the Grand Army of France was defeated, and then he mounted a comeback, but it didn't work. When the British landed forces and a weakened Napoleon was defeated by a combined British and Prussian force, Germans, okay, at Waterloo. And this led to the century of England, 130 years of England and the greatest empire that the world had ever seen, dominating. I mean, this is the British Empire. At one point or another, they controlled all of this territory. Biggest empire ever. And we also talked quickly about how important it was that the French, who were trying to keep the British power down, joined the American Revolution along with the Spanish and the Dutch to help us win our freedom. We got our freedom because of 146 Allied ships. We had no Navy whatsoever. Look at the American ships, none. And if you're an Atlantic coastal power dependent on trade, a bunch of Atlantic little countries along the Atlantic coast, if you get blockaded by the British Navy, you're not going anywhere. You're going to stay part of the British Empire, like it or not. But it was this naval power that offset that and gave American independence. Americans, though, have been pretty obsessed with our own westward expansion. So we didn't really get involved in foreign affairs. We never really had an we never really had a diplomatic power, nor a military power to speak of. We would organize our army every time there was a war, but then we send them home. So we had no permanent military presence and whatever. And then, of course, At World War I, same thing happened. We put a military together to go help out in World War I, come back, tremendous losses. We just didn't want to do that again. So we became isolationist. We don't want to participate in foreign policy. Now, look, we're divided in those days too. Most of Americans wanted to stay isolationist, not get involved in foreign policy, but many Americans did and said, look, it's in our advantage to get involved, right? I mean, even from a business perspective, if we have good trade relations with other countries, we can make more money. But it was a bad time to decide to take 20 years off from being involved in the world. We see the rise of Hitler. We see the rise of Empire of Japan. We told you about the story of Dunkirk. We told you about the story of modern day Thermopylae, modern day Salamis in the air over Britain. And the British Empire did that. They were more like Athens than we were. We were kind of standing on the sidelines, frankly, for the first year and a half of that war. But when we did enter in, we entered in because of a catastrophic moment. There was a catastrophic event. And sometimes these catastrophic events are the ones that really change history. They change the balance of power. So the United States went from being an economic power, which we had been since the late 1890s, to, oh, guess what? We're going to have more military power than anybody else, particularly. We're going to replace the British as having the biggest navy, and the Germans and the Japanese. We're going to have the Supreme Navy. We're also going to have a superior air force compared to that of the Germans and the British and the Japanese, because we're going to destroy their ability to make war. And we're going to go and become decent diplomats. It was the British that had been the diplomats for the last 130 years, and the French before that. The United States now becomes a diplomatic power as well. Pearl Harbor did that. Pearl Harbor woke us up and said, if you're going to be a great power, you can't just pursue economic power. You have to also pursue the other parts of power, soft power, diplomatic power. And you also have to pursue strong military. To this day, we still have the most powerful Navy ever, but there was another power that did exactly the same thing at nearly the same time. Russia is a big landmass. And after one of the fallouts of World War I was that the communists got control under the Bolsheviks. And they took this backwards country and turned it into the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Basically, what they created, though, was a totalitarian dictatorship. Now, here's a place where Americans have a lot of problems. Americans have problems because they don't understand the definitions of words. When I was growing up, we lumped in the communist economic system, and that's what it is, it's an economic system, with the form of government that called itself communism, and that was totalitarianism. Totalitarianism is basically autocracy, monarchy turned to autocracy on steroids. And so controlling every part of the economy of the country. Now, the thing is, too, we were always taught wrongly that, oh, the communists are inept. They can't do anything right. They can't, make good this. We make better products. We do this. We do that, create more wealth and all that kind of stuff. We never really understood the fundamentals of what Russia was when it started out in 1917 and became the Soviet Union. They were a backwards agricultural country. In many places, still medieval Europe. And the communists, totalitarians, in all of their criticisms you can have of them, which are many, turned that country around and made it an industrial power in less than 20 years. They turned them into industrial power so strong that when they were attacked by the Germans, who had the best fighting force ever created to that point on land, the most tanks, the most equipment, the best designed equipment, they were able to win. They were able, for example, with the tanks, to build a tank that was superior in many ways than the highly advanced technical tanks of the Germans, the Panzers. The thing is with the Soviet Union is they created a tank that was simpler, that would work in the mud, that there were less things to go wrong with it, with a larger artillery piece that was a little faster because it didn't carry quite so much armor. And as a result, it was more maneuverable, and the T5 tank was not just the equal, but the superior to the Panzer. And they could make a lot of them. Now, it was the biggest tank battle in all of human history between the Soviet tanks and the German tanks. And guess who won that? It was the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union went from backward agricultural failure in World War I, they got beat by the Germans badly, to 20 years later turning the tides, but at huge cost. 20 million Soviet citizens would perish in the event. They would disable over 90% of the German Nazi military machine. The first 2 years of the war, they suffered so tremendously. They lost land, they lost people, they lost territory, and they never won a battle. Their 3 major cities were completely surrounded by Nazis, but they refused to surrender. Well, that's one advantage of having a totalitarian leader like Stalin. When he makes up his mind, oh yeah, he got really stubborn at a place called Stalingrad, a city named after him, an industrial city along the Volga River that was 90% in the hands of the Germans. The Germans were moving in to control the other 10%, and they just refused to give it up. Suffering tremendous casualties, they just kept sending waves of soldiers over the river again and again, some totally untrained. And then when winter came, they were able to surround the German army because they were trained in winter fighting. They had soldiers trained on skis, and the tanks could work. The German tanks couldn't because they didn't have the right lubricants and whatever. It was a change moment in world history. Started in late 1942, would end in 1943 in the Battle of Stalingrad, the greatest land battle ever fought, and the Soviet Union wins. And not only did they win, they never lost again. Yeah, they suffered 20 million casual dead, but they never lost again. And so Americans always underestimated how effective a communist system with a totalitarian dictatorship, how effective it can be. It was this same group that launched the first space satellite, the first dog in space, the first man in space, and created the first orbiting space station. They'd really literally kicked our butt when it came to the space program. We like to think we won that, but evidence to the contrary. The reason they were worrying so much about missile technology and creating their space program wasn't so much to create scientific laboratories up in space, which we never did. We joined their effort in the International Space Station. We don't even have an American rocket that can get us to the space station and back. SpaceX now, a company, might be able to do it, which will be great. But by the same token, they're a private company. It's not American, right? It's an international kind of company. Elon Musk is from South Africa. I don't know if you know that or not. But at any rate, the point is, okay, is that they were effective. And they created an empire too. With the fall of the Nazis, they took over all of this area that once independent countries under control or controlled by Germany. And they created the massive Soviet empire. At the same time, the Americans are doing the same thing. We're creating an empire in the West, and they're creating an empire in the East. And then China, of course, it falls to communist Mao Zedong, the most populous country in the world at the time. And then what we have is a situation where half of the world's people and half of the world's land area is now controlled by a communist economy with totalitarian dictatorships at their core. This is the beginning of what we call the Cold War. And it would lead us to war in Vietnam. It would lead us to war in Korea. It would lead us to war in Afghanistan. Yeah, because the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan and we wanted to try to keep them out. So we funded people like, Osama bin Laden. That was a mistake. And anyway, the Soviet Union spent so much in Afghanistan, it hurt their economy. Their economy struggled anyway. What we have to understand is that while they had this fantastic empire, so much of their effort went into military. They have a much bigger nuclear arsenal, Russia today, than we do. They have more missiles, more nuclear bombs than we do. But their communist economic system didn't produce enough wealth to support that. Whereas our capitalist system in the West did. And therein lies the difference. Remember the power structure. You need soft power, which is diplomatic power. You need economic power and military power. And the Soviet Union would basically be contained by a rising empire of the Americans. We created a thing called the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. We got all these European powers who were in danger of falling to communist type dictators themselves, but we shoved money and capital and reinvented their economy for them, rebuilt them so they became our allies. It was a genius move. It was called the Marshall Plan, and it was put in by Truman, President Truman. And we rebuilt the economies of Europe. Why? Because economies that are failing might turn to alternatives like communism. Well, they didn't. They became economic powerhouses like Germany is today, like France is today, like England still is, Netherlands, and in Italy. I mean, you know, come on, all the greatest cars in the world are made here, Germany and Italy. I think the largest car company is Renault, right? It's a French company. In fact, it's a French company right now that makes the most of the world's airplanes, right? Boeing has now fallen to second place behind Airbus. But these then became our allies, and we checked the rising power of this other empire. And it was really a bipolar clash between our way of doing things and their way of doing things. We always run down their way because, oh, they couldn't be successful because we're always successful. And the truth of the matter is, you have to look at it a little more objectively than that. But then what happens is this: where is it written that the Soviet Empire goes on forever? The Soviet Union, their economy cracked. They couldn't maintain their control over these countries anymore that you see down here. And in 1991, it was over. It broke apart. It shattered from within. Where is it written that the Soviet Empire goes on forever? Well, it lasted 47 years, and that's all. It didn't last long. Athens lasted longer. And so we win the Cold War, 1991. And yet we still have Americans, even in this last election, worried about, oh, communism, America's going to become, God, no way. Communism ended in 1991 around the world. China had given it up much earlier than that. China gave up the communist way of doing things. And let's jump ahead to China. China has always had a confident self-image where they have gone through stages since 5,000 years ago of civilization. And over that period of time, they have had the world's biggest economy because they've been less open to invasions and wars and things. And yes, they've broken apart, and then they form new dynasties, and they break apart, and so you get these phases. But here we are, we're still in classical ancient history here, and they're creating these massive empires. Look at the Tang Dynasty in 710. That's the medieval Europe is just shattered at this particular point. Look at here we go. I love this one. This is the Yuan Dynasty, bigger than current China today. The Ming Dynasty was a powerhouse. The Qin Dynasty, 1820, and up until 1820, they were dominant, and they lost their place in terms of the dominance to the Europeans for a time. And then they experimented with communism under Mao Zedong, and it failed. It didn't work. So they invited Nixon from the US president to visit them, and they ended it right then and there. So communism died in China starting in 1972. It's no longer a thing, and yet Americans are still debating it as if it was an issue. The truth of the matter is, people my age, we still think it's out, it's gone. Unless you live in North Korea, you don't have it anymore. All right, so that's a good place to stop. It's where the other class stopped, and we'll finish this lecture on next time we see you on Monday live. We'll be there live.